Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter for boxing-related tweets, or you can subscribe to the channel, click that notifications button, and get a new notification whenever a new video is uploaded. Let's continue with this little mini-series we're doing, where football marries boxing, essentially. We're going to do a guide to 2020. This is Group D. But additionally to that, there's a boxing twist. We're going to talk about a lot of historical boxing stories from the relevant teams involved in the relevant groups, and talk about the pound for pound best fighters that they produced and who would have qualified in some sort of pound for pound mythical tournament between these teams. It's just a little bit of fun. It's all very subjective, and I'm more than happy to hear everybody else's views on the topic. Now, before we get into the nitty gritty of all this, obviously what occurred today with Christian Eriksen was harrowing to behold. Thank the Lord God in heaven that this guy managed to pull through. It seems he's in stable condition after collapsing on the field in the manner that he did. Is truly, it was terrible to see. His wife was there pitch side crying her eyes out while people tried to console her, as it appeared as though he had slipped away. He was completely unresponsive. He had that glazed over look in his eye where it looked like his soul had just left his body. So, thank God it all turned out okay. It seems that's the way anyway. And just take a moment to reflect when you see these sorts of things. Take a moment to get in touch with your loved ones. Take a moment to do something nice for a complete stranger. Try and make the place a better world with you in it than if you were not in it. Now let's move on to so let's get down and dirty with Group D. England, Croatia, Scotland and the Czech Republic. Mouth-watering for a variety of reasons. You've got the domestic rivalry between the English and the Scots. No doubt there'll be a lot of Braveheart watching in Glasgow and Edinburgh the night before this game. You've got England and Croatia, which is a repeat of the World Cup semi-final where Croatia came out on top. And you've got the Czech Republic, who not that long ago met Scotland. And additionally to that, they're a team that harks back to the glories of yesteryear, and they'll want to rediscover some of that glory. And so you've got a really, really interesting group. Can't wait for it. Let's talk a little bit about it. You ready for this transition? Look at that little origami for you, and in comes Harry Kane, one of the superstars of the England team. He's the man, really. A massive goal threat, has the ability to drop deep and get involved in play. He's very, very clever with his movement. You'll often see him take up a central position and then drop deep into almost this number 10 role. And you'll see the wide players of England that can sometimes make darting runs inside, diagonally, between the fullback and the centre-back, in that little pocket of space. And because Kane has dropped off deep, it causes some disarray in the opposition defence. You don't know whether, as a centre-back, whether you should follow Kane and potentially leave a space in the central area if the opposing winger manages to get goal side of the fullback near you. It can cause havoc. If you stay there and leave him to your defensive midfielder, you better hope your defensive midfielder cuts him out, because if he starts picking the ball up in pockets of space, he can cause havoc. He's going to be in the goals, and he is a major, major threat. Now, moving on from him, the one to watch, I've got to go Jack Grealish. I really love watching Jack play. He has recently been compared to Luis Figo by Jose Mourinho, and I can definitely see what he means. To me, he also reminds me a little bit of a guy like Zlatko Zahovic. For the hardcore international football fans out there, you'll remember the Slovenian superstar. He's the sort of guy that can pick up a ball full of confidence, make things happen, go inside, outside. He buzzes around as a dribbler, and he lets runners go around him, and he considers these options, and he's capable of taking you on, shooting, giving off a good pass. He's a game changer, and he's flamboyant in everything that he does, from the way he plays to the way he wears his socks below the calves and the slick back hair. Jack Grealish could certainly take this tournament by storm if he's on form. In terms of the fighter, there were a lot of options here. As you can see from the three pictures, I've gone with Bob Fitzsimmons, but let's talk a little bit about the other guys. Now, we'll start off with the guy on the bottom left. His name is John Broughton, better known as Jack Broughton, which kind of reminds me of the line in Scent of a Woman, the Al Pacino movie, where he asks for a drink. He asks for a John Daniels, and the kid says, "Do you mean Jack?" And he says, "It's Jack to you, but when you've known him as long as I have, son." Well, this is like that in reverse. John Broughton, better known as Jack Broughton, was a pioneer of the sport. Okay, this is a guy that had a fighting career that spanned 42 years, from 1725 to 1767, and it was a bare-knuckle career. Okay, absolutely crazy. He held the Championship of England for over 20 years. over 2 separate reigns as a champion. Now, here's the irony, right? He tried to bring in these revised rules after he accidentally killed a man called George Stevenson. He fought him for 35 minutes. It was brutal, and Stevenson essentially died at his hand. So he wanted to try and make things safer, and he drew inspiration from seeing a statue of a Greek boxer who was wearing the cestus. Now, the cestus are what you could call gloves back in the day, but the irony is he's brought in gloves to make boxing safer, whereas the cestus was much more brutal than bare knuckle boxing. It was basically a bunch of leather straps, and they would have iron sort of bolts attached to them. So imagine they're kind of like knuckle dusters, but worse. So you have pieces of iron and shards and whatever attached to these leather straps around your hands and wrists. My word, the sort of damage that you could cause. And of course, Greco-Roman wrestling, as the name gives away, is a Greek martial art. And that was one of the 2 martial arts. And the other one was a sort of like a striking stroke grappling art. It was called pankration, which was almost like a mixture between wrestling and what we know today as boxing, but with all these brutal rules involved. Biting was allowed, choking. You know, there was one guy who is immortalized in Greek mythology. His name was Archichion, and Archichion was held in a lock. And very few fighters are willing to go to the lengths that this guy was willing to go to in order to win a fight. He was in a lock where the opponent had his thighs wrapped around his neck, squeezing on his air passage, trying to dislocate his neck. Moments away from victory and the Pankration title. But Archichion refused to submit. Instead, he decided to start to break the feet and the toes, dislocate the toes of the opponent. And it worked. The opponent tapped out, unable to bear the pain. However, the lock was in so hard and so long that Archichion had his windpipe crushed, and he ended up dying. And they ended up crowning the corpse of Archichion as the victor, immortalizing him in Greek folklore. And this is a true story, by the way. And the ancient Greeks had this approach. They had this phrase as well: if they're going to war, come on your shield, with your shield, or on it. What that meant is that the shield, when you came on it, acted almost like a coffin that you see today. They would be carried back with their shields. If any fighter, any soldier had an arrow in his back, they would have assumed he ran away. So they would refuse a burial. So to them, there was no fear of death. Only heroism and glory is what they sought to achieve. And it's the irony that this brutality, which is a million times more brutal than bare knuckle boxing, this brutality is what Broughton found inspiration from to actually try to make boxing safe. The guy in the middle is Ted Kid Lewis. The guy Mike Tyson said is probably the greatest fighter to come out of Britain. He retired with a record of 227 wins with 40 defeats and 23 no decisions. He had some really long rivalry with a guy called Jack Britton where they fought 20 times. He turned professional at 14 years old, and within 5 years he'd won the British and European featherweight title. And then he went to the United States and he ended up winning a world title. And he won 6 more British and European titles as well after the First World War. He was a fantastic fighter who ended up winning a total of 9 world titles as well, from featherweight to middleweight. So you're talking about an elite level fighter that many people consider to be the very best. But personally, I'm going to go for Bob Fitzsimmons, and I'll explain why. Now, Bob Fitzsimmons was a wonderful, wonderful fighter who turned professional in the late 1800s. You have to understand, he was the first ever 3-weight world champion. Back in the day when there weren't as many weight categories as there are now, when I say 3-weight, he went from middleweight to heavyweight, winning every title available. In other words, the light heavyweight in between. He knocked out, Dempsey. He knocked him down 13 times, according to reports. He also beat Gentleman Jim Corbett, a guy who had dethroned John L. Sullivan, I guess you could say the guy who at the time was considered absolutely untouchable. He was older at the time, but nonetheless, massive scalp on Jim Corbett's resume, and Bob Fitzsimmons knocked him out. He also won a world title at light heavyweight, beating Con Coughlin. And in fact, Coughlin actually died after that defeat. So another story of tragedy in the sport of boxing. He had a career of 51, 8 and 5 with 44 knockouts. He's ranked in the top 8, in fact number 8, in the list of the 100 most powerful punchers of all time, according to Ring magazine. Little article that I've got posted at the bottom, which I've magnified here for you to be able to follow. Read what this says about him. It talks about the audience when he stepped into the ring. He was unknown at the time, and, well, certainly unknown in Pennsylvania. He fought at Williamsport Stadium there. On the night of January the 29th, 1917, it says they laughed at his physique until he fought. He was middle-aged, bald-headed, skinny and gawky. His appearance sent titters of amusement through the crowd. His opponent, a promising young heavyweight named Dan Sweeney, bounded out at the bell, swinging punches viciously. Repeatedly, he tried for the face and head, but the veteran kept moving his chin or lifting his shoulders and making the blows slip off harmlessly. Does that not sound like a highly skilled fighter, a highly skilled operator? Does that not sound like a guy that would employ what you'd call today a shoulder roll? In fact, although people laughed at his body, and he seemed to have some sort of a complex, you could say, because he used to wear these quite heavily woven shorts to hide the distance between his trunk and the length of his legs. He was quite lanky, and he was obviously feeling a bit shameful about that. He was uncomfortable about his body. Despite that, he was very proud of the fact that he didn't have scarring on his face. So not only are you talking about a guy who's ranked as the top 8 biggest punchers pound for pound in the history of the sport. In fact, it doesn't say pound for pound. Ring magazine had him in the top 8 greatest punchers in the sport. Despite that, he's also obviously got a fantastic defense. He was planning a comeback later on in his career, and it says his plans were interrupted by the sudden death of his wife Rose, necessitating a search for her successor. He found her in a beautiful musical comedy star, Julia Gifford. Necessitated a search for her successor? Dude, this ain't like you're running a restaurant and your head chef's left and you need to find a successor. This is his wife. This is the love of his life. It was his second wife. He was married 4 times. You go on to read that, not unnaturally, the marriage did not last. It was not long before the third Mrs. Fitzsimmons was filing for divorce. Her complaint was that he was still in love with her predecessor. I mean, that's really tragic, isn't it? Fitzsimmons thereupon made his 4th and last trip to the altar. His choice this time was the young Italian singer named Tino Zella, who was visiting America with an opera company. They remained happy until he died. I considered also including Lennox Lewis, but then I thought, look, this is unfair. I can't really include Lennox Lewis in this because at the end of the day, Lennox was of Jamaican extraction, represented Canada when he was young. Then he moved to the UK and started to represent Great Britain. So why would it be fair for me to apply him in this regard to England and not Wales or Scotland? You know, why does he belong to one of the countries in the GB rather than all of them? Just because he happened to live in England? If he'd moved to Scotland, would he suddenly then be eligible for representing Scotland instead? So I decided to leave Lennox out. He's of course a shout as well, though, for the best guy to ever come out of the British Isles. Now moving on from that, we go to Croatia. The Real Madrid star loves to dictate a game, whether it's short passing, long range passing. He can strike a ball into the top corner. He's virtually impossible to get the ball off. He's just a fantastic all-round talent, and he'll be looking to lead Croatia from midfield. And the one to look out for, I've picked MISLAV ORSIC. ORSIC, Spurs fans will have nightmares about this guy. He plays for Dinamo Zagreb, a very talented left winger. He's actually on the bench for them. He's not a starter, but he's the sort of guy that can come on and make a difference. And there's a reason I said Spurs fans would have a nightmare. He scored a terrific hat-trick. Go check out the goals he scored to knock Spurs out of the Europa League this season. He'll be hoping to sprinkle some more of that magic if he comes off the bench in this tournament. Which takes us on to Croatia's fighter, Mate Parlov. Parlov was a highly decorated amateur with gold medals in the Olympic Games in '72, in the World Amateur Championships in Havana in '74, in the European Amateur Championships. He had gold medals in Madrid in '71 and Belgrade in '73, and prior to that in Bucharest in '69 he had a silver medal. Highly decorated, top level professional as well. He did have a points defeat to Matthew Saad Mohammed, another Hall of Famer, but they had a rematch and that fight was a draw after 10 rounds. So you're talking about a very high level operator who also has a victory victory over John Conte, who is rated as one of Britain's best ever produced. So this was a very high level operator, and from there we move on to Scotland, but they can be proud of Parlov. And there's Andy Robertson, a fantastic player for Scotland, one of the best left backs and left wing backs in world football, marauding, fantastic left foot, he can defend, he can do everything, great delivery, everything you could possibly want from a fullback in the modern game, Andy Robertson has got. And it's just unlucky for Scotland that two of their best players perhaps play in the same position alongside Kieran Tierney, that is. I'm sure they'll fit them both into the team. Tierney might be able to play in a back three as a centre back, but the fact of the matter is it's just a shame that they happen to have produced so much talent and they just happen to share the same sort of position. In terms of the one to watch, you've got John McGinn, a very high energy attacking midfielder who likes to make late runs into the box. He can be a goal threat with those late runs into the box. He can get himself into really good positions. He'll be hoping to nick a goal or two at this tournament and make an impact. In terms of the best Scottish fighter, I know Josh Taylor has achieved something incredible of late with the undisputed light welterweight title. Nonetheless, his own hero is the guy that I have to give the title to, the fantastic Ken Buchanan. Taylor's hero, Ken, was able to travel to Puerto Rico in 1970 to win the world title against Ismael Laguna after a 15-round decision. He defended his title successfully before he eventually faced Roberto Duran, the man that Floyd Mayweather considers to be the second best fighter of all time after himself. Now, Buchanan lost to Duran by way of what was a controversial 13th round stoppage, which many people seem to believe was caused by a low blow. He ended up coming back from that defeat though, and he knocked out the former 3-weight world champion Carlos Ortiz. So he's a guy that operated at a very, very high level for a very long time. He then went on to fight for the British title, and he won the British title against a fellow Scot that you're all aware of, Jim Watt. But it just goes to show the level of prestige that the British title is held in by British fighters, when you consider that even world title winners are still interested in winning that Lonsdale belt. It's always carried a special place in fighters' hearts, and you can see him there in that photograph wearing it in the bottom left of the screen. He retired with a record of 61-8. And I know 8 defeats sounds like a lot, but if you consider that he lost 5 of his last 7 fights when he was right at the tail end of his career, then you'll kind of understand why that record looks a lot worse than it should have actually been. He was a much better fighter than that record would even suggest. But one of Scotland's most famous sons, Ken Buchanan. And now we move on to the Czech Republic. The Marouane Fellaini-esque TOMAS SOUCEK is their star man. Very, very good in the air, particularly from set pieces. He will be a consistent threat for them from set pieces. He's a guy that could be a real leader for the Czechs. In terms of the one to look out for, Thomas PEKHART hasn't always had the most prolific of times wherever he's been. There have been some places where, to be honest with you, he's just outright not scored enough goals. But he's 6'5" and a real threat from aerial deliveries. He's had a terrific season at Legia Warsaw, and he will be going into this tournament filled with confidence. So in terms of their fighter, there wasn't too much to pick from, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. It's not a nation with a rich history in the sport. I've gone for a guy considered their most decorated champion. Konecny is actually still active. He has held the WBO interim, the European and the European Union light middleweight titles. He also challenged for the middleweight title when he fought Peter Quillin. He fell short, losing by unanimous decision. But he's the best performer in a nation without a rich history in boxing. Which leaves us to the question of who qualifies. I actually believe it will be England and Croatia that will qualify. Listen, Scotland are a very combative side. They're a good side. They finished behind the Czech Republic in the groups in the groups for the Nations League. They were actually in the same group. However, Scotland did get the better of them home and away, beating them 2-1 in the Czech Republic and 1-0 at home. So they'll be confident going into that particular game. And they're on good form as well, Scotland, in the run-up to this. They've not lost in their last 5 games. Having said that, I do believe England are a very strong outfit. They're more than capable of going on a very deep run. They've got a lot of quality in the final third, in peripheral areas, and of course with Harry Kane. England's main weakness, in my humble opinion, is that area of the back end of the spine, that sort of holding midfield area, stroke centre-back area at the highest level. I'm not 100% convinced by them. I think they might be an issue there. The Czechs are a decent side. They will hope to get through in third spot. They'll be targeting the Scots. They'll be hoping to nip them there, but and hope to qualify as one of the best placed third teams. But in the top two, I go for England and Croatia. The latter are very technically gifted and they know how to win big games. They're a big tournament team. So I think they'll be able to come through this. With regards to the fighters, I'm going with the two Brits. Let me know if you disagree with that. Let me know if you feel that Parlov should have been in here. I personally believe that you can't overlook Bob Fitzsimmons and Ken Buchanan. Thanks for watching, everyone. Let me know what you think. Take care. God bless.